Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome again to the Alternative Exit. Today, I'm really excited to introduce you to a leader who's been really influential for me in the field of employee ownership. So Dr. Tej Gonza is the co-founder and director of the Institute of Economic Democracy in Slovenia. His work at the IED focuses on democratic practices in the economy through broad-based ownership, but his work doesn't stop there. He's a researcher at the research fellow at the Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing at Rutgers. He's a researcher at the University of Ljubljana. He speaks a lot about employee ownership via sort of other channels. And most importantly, I think one of the things we're going to dive in a lot today is the co-author of the European ESOP, which is a new innovative model to sort of drive employee ownership across Europe. So yeah, Tej, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Well, thank you for inviting me. So happy and honored to be here, I have to say, in company of many big thinkers that you hosted before. Yeah, so thank you.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure. It's like a big focus of what we're trying to do is obviously educate these retiring owners about the different opportunities that there are for employee ownership. And I think what you've really been doing sort of in the work in your recent dissertation and the work doing with the European ESOP is really sort of charting a new path for people. But we'll dive into that a little bit later. But let's sort of just back it up a little bit. You've been spending a lot of your time and effort focused on this broad-based ownership and a democratic workplace. What initially brought you into this space?
I guess it all started in my master's studies about 10 years ago. Well, it's a funny story. So I've studied economics. And for those of you that studied economics at universities, you know that you usually don't, hear about those alternative types of ownership, business ownership. And this is especially the case in Slovenia, which has, the past with socialisms, with the Yugoslavian socialism and self-management that for, most economists think it did not turn out too well in terms of economic efficiency and some other issues around that. So it's very difficult to hear any types of alternative theories surrounding ownership at the university. But I had this one mentor, one assistant professor from microeconomics in my first year, who basically kind of got me into the more heterodox economic theories. And as part of that, I got to learn about democratic ownership, about economic democracy, about what's going on in the US with ESOPs and other forms of based employee ownership. And funnily enough, like 15 years after that, when I started working on policy in Slovenia in this field, that assistant professor is now a state secretary at Ministry of Labor, working on ESOP legislation together with our organization. So it's a nice circle.
Absolutely amazing. So okay, so that's a long history and sort of very much focused. Like how long ago did you set up the IED?
It's not that long ago. It's been 7 years now. So
okay.
We're still a relatively young and small organization, a small non-profit, let's call it. But we've seen growth in terms of membership in our organization, impact that we have. I think that in the past 7 years, the field of employee ownership in Slovenia, which has been very much underdeveloped, also due to the historical contingencies with self-management, I think it moved substantially. And now most of the political parties, most of the business stakeholders kind of accept that there is something that employee ownership has to offer. And this is something that's really nice to see. And I think that we are at least partially to be blamed for that. So that's.
Well, it's a good thing to be blamed for. So, but you obviously talked about the policymakers really sort of taking a little bit more notice. I mean, you also talked about, I guess, sort of your sort of intent and your pathway into the space. But when you think about what do you see as the biggest benefits and drivers of employee ownership? I mean, what really makes you so passionate about it?
Well, that's a very good question. So first of all, there is so many perspectives that you can take on the benefits of employee ownership, and this is what we do at our organization as well. It really depends who you talk to.
Yeah.
So talking with the business community, you can cite research showing then that employee-owned businesses consistently outperform conventional businesses in terms of productivity growth, sales growth, business resilience, in terms of lower fluctuation of workers, higher organizational affiliation, better motivation, better well-being of workers, etc., etc. So it's really creating a better workplace for the business. And then you have the social perspective. You have the perspective of, our economies are by the current default structured in a way that they produce high income and wealth inequalities. And what employee ownership can do is really to it's not part of the redistributive policies where you need a government coming in, and then redistributing the outcomes of distribution in the market economy. It's actually creating more egalitarian patterns of that distribution at the outset. So it's basically about redistribution of sources of wealth and income, which is capital in businesses. And in that sense, so lowering economic and inequalities, the effect it has on the health of political democracies. So it has a lot of spillover effects. And maybe another thing that might be very relevant for Europe right now is economic autonomy. So we have this huge generational change in ownership of businesses with a wave of business owners retiring in the next 5 to 10 years in Europe, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of businesses and millions of jobs, right? And it's the first time that this is happening in a very globalized economy. So, and when you have a very globalized economy, high capital mobility, and businesses that are up for the take, right? You really have to be careful and strategic in as a policy maker, as a decision maker, in thinking about what types of ownership transfer you want to support. Do you want European Union businesses, the small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the engine of growth, innovation, job stability? Do you want them to be purchased by big private equity actors, big competitors from states, from China, from other countries? Or do you want those companies to be anchored within European communities? So it's a huge strategic, let's say, reflection that's needed on what to encourage, what to incentivize, and how to regulate that. So there are so many social and economic impacts of employee ownership that are very relevant for this day and age.
Yeah. Well, I think that those three things that you talk about there, between sort of the business, the social, and sort of the broader macroeconomic, I mean, they're the things that really excite me about it as well. It just seems like there's just a win-win every way you look at it. It's not trying to replace capitalism. It's really sort of harnessing it to deliver good outcomes all across the board. But where do you see? You've been doing a lot of work like in trying to drive policy across sort of the EU as well, outside of Slovenia and influencing people across the EU. Where are you seeing the pushback?
Well, the pushback is that it's not. First of all, it's not a common knowledge yet, at least in the European context. So it's becoming in the US. It's becoming common knowledge in the UK, where you have this huge growth of employee ownership sector. But European Union seems to lag behind, understanding of the potential behind employee ownership, and that's what we're trying to tackle. And one thing that is a drawback is that it does not occur spontaneously in the market economy. So it's not something that, because employee-owned businesses are generally more efficient and more productive, it's not that they will just become prevalent mode of economic production. This is not how reality of market economies work. There are many reasons for that, and I don't want to go into that, but the case is you need policy action, you need dedicated policy instruments in terms of regulatory environments, fiscal incentives, supportive financial instruments, dedicated financial instruments. You need a lot of technical expertise on how to do comparisons, to do them in a way that they are successful, right? Because we also have a lot of experience, for example, with self-management and with some other forms of employee ownership that did not work as well as some others do in the market economy. And you really need that knowledge. You need to find a way to put that knowledge to use. So it's a lot of, I would say, there is some kind of social political investment if you want to create institutional conditions that allow this sector to grow. And this is where we are right now in the debates with the EU to get this understanding of the potential up, and then following that, we hope will be institutional support.
Yeah, because what you mentioned sort of right at the top, like you talked about sort of bipartisan support in the Slovenian government, and we've heard it a lot from the other guests as well. Is that that's similar in the US and the UK, and even in Canada? We find that even like there have been regulatory changes in those markets, but I find that like in the conversations we've been having here, so I've been having across Europe, like there's no one that says this is a bad idea, but there's still that they're not making the changes. Do you see I guess the regulatory environment changing across Europe to support this, to align with the political support that you're experiencing in Slovenia and they have in other markets?
So I would say that nobody says it's a bad idea after well explained what it actually is.
Yeah.
So employee ownership is one of those things that has a lot of, as I said, historical baggage, ideological baggage, and you really need to devote time for advocacy, for public informing, for public education in terms of the public discourse, and in terms of the more political discourse in among the decision makers. So you're right. When you start explaining what it actually is, that it's voluntary, that it's not forced, that it's kind of just incentivizing business practices that are socially responsible, that are also economically very efficient and effective. Nobody has anything against that. Not on the left side of the spectrum, nor on the right side of the spectrum. There are some interest groups that might feel a bit threatened by employee ownership, but this is already another story. So we might even go into that later. But I see that the field is developing in the EU space. I see Slovenia doing very interesting things. The Slovenian government right now with legislation doing something very interesting. I see Denmark really, I think they devoted 150 millions of government budget to develop policies on economic democracy, and this was proposed by the conservative government, supported in the parliament without the vote against. So it's amazing. And I also see Ireland, I think, is among those three countries that are developing new legislation for employee buyouts. So there are a few EU countries that are now spearheading the efforts in the European Union. And I also see some public officials at the EU level, at European Investment Bank, European Commission, European Parliament, that are taking notes and becoming interested in what's going on. So I'm optimistic.
Very good. Well, it's as I said, hopefully sort of more people can more of these sort of policymakers become aware, and we can start getting those sort of regulatory changes, because like I think even some data that you've shared in the past around like when there is that the sort of a policy that supports it, we see the markets moving quite quickly, like in the UK, where there's sort of just a massive shift towards exiting towards employee owners.
Impressive, very impressive. I mean, I'm not sure if you shared numbers with your audience, but it's expansive growth of employee-owned buyouts. In UK, employee buyouts have been the second most popular exit option for owners for two years in a row, 2023 and 2024. So it's becoming a mainstream, and this is also what we are trying to achieve in the EU.
Yeah, that's super exciting. So mean, in the UK, the exiting towards an employee-owned trust, an EOT, and I know, look, that's a similar. There's an EOT in Canada, slightly different flavors. There's ESOPs in the US. There's also EOTs in the US. There's purpose trust. There's all these different vehicles, I think, and you've obviously gone and created the European ESOP. So before we sort of dive into that, I'd love to if we just sort of think about what do you see as the core elements of a great employee-owned structure?
So I think the core element is the transitionary mechanism to employee ownership. So the employee ownership had challenges in the past, and cooperatives had challenges in the past because they were not able to become part of the economic mainstream. They have always been marginalized. And I think what ESOP has achieved in the US, and this is shared by the EOT in the UK, by the EOT in Canada, and by all the models that are now being developed in the EU, is that it's a mechanism that allows a conversion of an established business that's profitable business into an employee-owned business. So I think the main part of those successful models is the mechanism of financial leverage. So buying out companies through leverage, so employees don't have to invest their own personal savings into that, which is completely unrealistic expectation, right? They are the group of people that usually don't have a lot of money aside, or getting loans would threaten them existentially, etc. So you need a mechanism like that. And that mechanism, it's a very simple one. It's one that's used by private equity industry, let's say. It means you transfer part of the ownership. Let's say an owner wants to start with 30%, and that 30% is paid off gradually with part of the profits that the company produces in the future, right? So I think that mechanism is shared among all of those different models that are different in certain important areas, but it's shared among them all. So this is what also our model is based upon.
Okay, so there you talked about, like, I guess sort of one of the core requirements you see is, right, that employees don't have to bring any money to the table. They're sort of providing their work and their labor. What are some other elements that sort of I guess sort of are the first principles for you when sort of creating this?
Well, another one is special purpose vehicles, so that employees are not direct shareholders of the company. This creates a lot of problems in terms of succession, in terms of ensuring that employee ownership is maintained over a long term. And one of the way to ensure that is that you limit transferability of ownership. So you limit, the tradability of shares by just anchoring shares in a special purpose vehicle. And this is the ESOP trust, the EOT trust, or the cooperative trust that we have in the cooperative ESOP model. It means that employees obtain ownership rights to profits, rights to capital value, rights to governance through that vehicle, and not directly as shareholders. And I'm trying to, so this is a huge debate in the literature and in the field of employee ownership to distinguish between employee ownership, which is anchoring ownership rights with employment of the firm, and employee shareholding, which is more like a incentive structure, compensation scheme for the companies usually, right? And it does not usually lead to sustainable employee ownership structures. So we are trying to distinguish between employee ownership and employee shareholding.
Okay, so say like in the employee shareholder, I mean, is that similar to what you see in a lot of technology companies where people might get RSUs or stock options as part of that, but then they so I think that's the sort of keep up with, but they'd sell out of those at the time of an exit or when they leave the company. Is that what you mean by those two options?
Something like that. So either stock options or employee stock purchase plans. You have both those huge corporations like Microsoft, Apple, Google, where you can use some of your labor compensation bonuses to purchase shares, right? And but if you look at the numbers, those structures never reach any significant employee ownership. So, for example, I think the European average of employee shareholding is around 1%, 1 to 3% of ownership. So in European corporations that have those kind of employee ownership schemes or employee shareholder schemes, the employee ownership is very insignificant. The shareholding is very insignificant. And if we're trying to talk about a different kind of business, employee-owned business, we need, significant ownership in the hands of employees over a long term. And this is what those new models that are now coming up are trying to achieve.
Okay. So I just wanted to touch on, for me, I find that sort of super helpful. Like as you sort of outlined the difference between those two elements, like when you talk about the owners, like I guess one part that you talk about is both having access to like capital and profits. Because there are some models that you've sort of that with like sort of the EOT in the UK, for example, where they get one, not the other. Why do you think it's so important to have both?
Well, there is a huge debate right now in the field, and there are different sides, and it's very sensitive discussion. But my opinion is so. Again, we are coming out of self-management. Like until the 90s, we had self-managed firms in Yugoslavia, where you basically had collectivized ownership structures. It means that workers were governing the companies and were deciding on, let's say, profit allocation, right, at the end of the year. But if the profit was left in the company, if you had retained profit and the company growth, workers did not have anything out of that in terms of their personal interest.
Yeah.
So they only received profit that were distributed every year. And something similar is structured with the EOTs in the UK. So it's basically a structure that ensures profit sharing to employees, but not ownership in a real meaningful sense, right? And what the threat here is that there is much larger, let's say, incentive to take out profits than to leave profits in the firm.
With no ownership, the incentive lies on the profit side. Yeah,
exactly, okay. And there is a attention on the profit distribution side, right? Not on profit retention and growth, at least in terms of self-interested behavior. And another problem, I think, with the EOTs is that, for example, this is all financed with cash flows. So we have an owner selling the business, and for example, for the first 10, 15 years, the cash flows, the profits of the company are used to pay out the owner, right?
Mm-hmm.
The acquisition debt. And in that period of time, employees who are working for that company that's generating profits and paying out the owners, they will go out naked, so to say. So they will not accumulate capital value because they're paying out the owner. And in the ESOP model, you are paying out the owner in the same way, but at the same time, you're also accumulating capital value on your individual capital accounts. And so you have something out of that. You're not going out naked. You don't have this first generation cohort problem where you have one generation of workers paying out the owner, and then another generation coming in, and they basically get the cash flows, the valuable cash flows as a gift.
Yeah. Okay. Like it sounds like in both models that the first generation are still going to be paying. They're paying for the ownership to come in. It's just, but I guess in sort of in the ESOP models, they're also getting access to that. Like they're also sort of their equity is increasing
because they've got. In the ESOP model, then the next generation coming is paying them out, right?
Yeah.
And so forth. So you basically have this, So that would be a nice way to illustrate it.
Yeah, nice. Okay, awesome. Well, look, I think that's I think a great way to sort of encapsulate why it's sort of, I guess that's so important. A lot of aligning incentives around not just profits to also sort of capital, which sort of, I guess, goes towards that. I guess some of the big benefits of employee ownership in terms of survivability of these businesses and the long-term horizons in which they're able to think, which also creates a lot more positives around sort of thinking, making better decisions about communities and climate and all those elements.
Although I would add here what the reasoning is behind not having capital claim, right? So what, for example, Graham Nuttall, who is, let's say, the intellectual father of the EOT, what the reasons is to have a collectivized capital structure. You don't have the repurchase obligation pressures on the underlying company. So what happens in ESOP, when you pay out the acquisition debt, when you pay out the owners that exited, then the company still has to generate into the indefinite future enough of the surplus value, enough of the cash flow that that the company can also pay out the employees.
Right?
Yep. And sometimes in the ESOP model in the US, this creates repurchase obligation that puts a lot of liquidity demands on the operating company, and it may lead to some issues with that. It may lead to additional leverage, so it may lead to the situation where the company needs to get more loans to finance the people that went out of the company, or it may even lead to ESOP being forced to sell the stock it holds to cover the repurchase obligation. So in some situations, the fact that you have to finance continuously capital value with cash flows leads to unsustainability of employee ownership. So the argument of people behind the yield is this creates more sustainable structure. It limits, ownership rights for employees. It limits capital gain rights, but it leads to more sustainability over a long term.
Okay.
And this is basically, the starting point of when we started thinking about our model of how to address both problems at the same time.
So yeah, let's sort of dive into your model a little bit, about how you're able to address that with the European ESOP. Before we sort of dive into that, it would be great to just sort of give an overview of the ESOP. Like, where is it today in terms of how you've progressed it? Has it been deployed in any companies?
We published a paper called European ESOP, the structural features and the pilot implementation in Slovenia in 2022. But the first, let's say, version of that paper was published with the European Federation for Employee Ownership in 2020. The choice of the name might not be, the most honest one, because there are a few other people that try to define an European ESOP or national ESOP models. So I would kind of step back on that, and I would say it's a Slovenian ESOP or a cooperative ESOP model. And the main difference with this model is that instead of a trust as a special purpose vehicle, buying shares from the owners and holding the shares in the names of employees, we put in that place a cooperative that serves that function. So the cooperative is basically buying the shares of the underlying company, either from the company or from outstanding shares of other owners. So that's the main structural difference, let's say, to the trust-based models.
Okay.
And after the publication of that paper, so we have been working on that field in Slovenia since 2018, and we created a pilot model that can be implemented in Slovenia without any special legislation, right? So we did a few pilot projects. The biggest company that transitioned to this ESOP model in Slovenia is INEA with 120 people, and they are now 100% democratic firm through this cooperative ESOP model. So the transition has been finished, finalized, and we are now working with a bigger company, industrial company with 220 people that also wants to transition, and we did some smaller companies as well. So we wanted to do a practical implementation, not only to get credibility with decision makers in political sphere, but also to learn from the process, and that experience, helping companies to convert really helped us to write the legislation proposal much better, I think. So that was the next step, and then after that experience, we started writing the legislative proposal, which was now adopted by the Ministry for Labor and Ministry for Solidary Future here in Slovenia.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so you've got it live out in the field. You've got legislation that's been drafted and sort of in front of the Slovenian government to be able to perform. And like as I said, for me, the most important thing, it's been pressure tested. So it sounds like, so when you're setting up this structure, or like, let's just sort of go. It'd be great if you could just. I've got a lot of questions to ask about the structure, but it'd be great if you could just sort of give a broad-based introduction for people as to what is the European ESOP.
Okay, so one of the main features I already listed was the cooperative as a legal entity. Another one is the way we try to tackle the problem of having capital claim on the one hand, and at the same time not running into crippling repurchase obligation in the other hand. So what we did is we created this so-called, I think this is the main innovative feature, the rollover model. And the rollover model basically means that the cash flow coming from the underlying company to the ESOP is always used to repurchase the oldest obligations on the individual capital accounts. So that means that In the ESOP model, repurchase obligation is basically imposed when somebody exits the company.
Mm-hmm.
The law, ERISA law, basically says, okay, in 2 to 5 years, depending on the reason for the exit, the ESOP has to pay out the total value of the individual capital account.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine, having a cohort of workers closing retirement, and they have huge accounts, right, of a few €100,000 or dollars in States. And then the company has to finance in 2 years a few $1 million of the repurchase obligation. It's huge.
Yeah.
So what is we turn the tables. We basically say repurchase obligation is determined based on the available cash flows. So every year the board proposes distribution of allocation of profits, and the shareholder assembly of the underlying company supports or confirms votes on that profit distribution decision. And based on how many profits are transferred from the underlying company to this cooperative holding vehicle, based on that, you have the repurchase obligation. So those profits are then used to pay out the oldest accounts first, right? So it's not vice versa. It basically says you have that amount of money every year, a certain year. It depends on the business cycle. It depends on the investment cycle, right? And then that amount of money is used to pay out the repurchase obligation.
Okay, so instead of using time as the constraint, like it was in the ESOP model, which sort of puts some undue pressure on the company to be able to find the cash, it's, hey, let's do it based off the available cash that you guys are
based
saying.
on the available cash, which means that the dependent variable becomes time, right? So time becomes like a flexible variable that can be either you're paid out in 3 years or you might be paid out in 7 years. This is part of the agreement that when you enter this structure. So if the company is in a bad situation in terms of liquidity, a few years there might be no cash coming to ESOP buying out the oldest accounts, right? So it really depends on the amount. So it's a kind of a safety for not decapitalizing the underlying company. It's kind of ensuring safety so that the company survives regardless of fluctuation of employees and so forth.
Makes a lot of sense. So we've got the structure of the SPV. You talked about sort of the rollover recapitalization requirements. I think one thing you did touch on there is like the governance model. Like, how do they make that decision between what's that percentage that's going to be allocated towards rollover, and how is that made between the SPV, or for you guys, you talk about that co-op SPV and the company, right? How is how are those decisions made, and how do we make sure that the employees have a voice in that?
So in terms of the governance, we have 2 levels of governance structure in the co-op ESOP model. You have the level on the cooperative itself, and in the cooperative, we try to create a democratic structure, 1 person, 1 vote. And what that means is that the members of the cooperative vote on the board of the cooperative. So they vote on the representatives that then in turn represent their voice on the level of the underlying company. And that is conventional corporate governance. So if the cooperative has 30% of the stock, then the democratically elected representatives vote on that 30% of the stock at the level of the shareholder assembly of the operating company. So that's the governance structure. And when this becomes 100% co-op ESOP, this becomes a democratic firm, like the one we have in, like, for example, like Mondragon cooperatives. It becomes a similar governance structure.
Okay, so that's where that's basically the company vehicle may not even be required at that point in time. It could just roll straight up into the co-op.
There were ideas that they just wrote together. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They're just merged, but it's not necessary.
Why? I mean, when you think about that SPV, like there's that element of like there's obviously different models you could have looked at. Obviously there was trusts, there's co-ops, there's even just limited companies. Like, why did you guys choose to go the co-op route?
It's a good question. So I gave already one of the reasons. One of the reasons is that we think, and based on the experience, the special purpose vehicle, having something separate from the underlying company, ensures evergreen structure. So regardless of employees coming into the company, leaving the company, the stock is held by this special purpose vehicle. And in that sense, it's kind of anchored there, right? There has to be a collective decision by the cooperative members to sell the stock. It's not on the individual level to decide, what to do with the shares, with shares. And secondly, it's a transition mechanism. So rather than having a cooperative conversion model, which is traditionally in Europe, so having companies convert to cooperatives under the operating companies itself, this kind of ensures graduality. So you can start with small percentages, you can increase that percentage later on. And this is one of the main, I think, reasons why you can have scalability with this model, but you really cannot have scalability with the cooperative conversion model. For example, graduality helps with the decision of the owners. Owner might want to start with 20% and may be very reluctant to do 100% conversion at once, right? So psychologically. Secondly, cultural change. You allow graduality in conversion to a democratic business, which means that you grant some time to employees to educate on issues, to gain financial literacy, to understand ownership values, and so forth. It's also much less complex in terms of financial complexity, legal complexity, so it's easier to finance. If you want to convert the whole business into a cooperative, you need to ensure 100% of the purchasing price of the stock value to the exiting owner. With this, you can have this gradually, and banks and other lending institutions are much more willing to enter into gradual conversions. So
especially
we have
if the co-ops are or if that SPV is a minority owner
exactly
at that point in time.
Exactly.
Okay.
So the graduality is very important here as well.
No, it makes a lot of sense. In terms of having that having that SPV, not having an employees come and go, you don't have to change the shareholding structure of the company.
It stays the same.
Yeah. A lot of simplicity there. I like that. And so, but again, we come back to sort of my question as to why the co-op structure for that SPV rather than a trust or a limited company.
Well, first of all, it's the legal system. So in our legal system, we don't even have a trust.
Okay, it makes it tough then. Yeah,
that's a pragmatic kind of answer.
Yeah.
But then let's call it moral answer or value-based answer is that you ensure a participatory structure by legal default.
Yeah.
With the ESOP model in the US, with the EOT model, they are very paternalistic models. So you create a trust for people that you don't have trust in, for minor, for incapable, and it's a very the attitude that's very common in the business community. It's a so-called workist kind of attitude of not trusting employees to be able to make rational decisions. And in terms of personal philosophy and in terms of people who are working on this model, we really do not believe in that. So we think that with proper education, with proper information, and with obviously proper time to adjust to a new situation in the workplace, employees can be very rational decision makers.
Okay. Yep, absolutely. I 100% agree on that. It's people always underestimates of the potential of the value and capacity for individuals, workers to make great decisions for the business moving forward. But it's interesting you talk about that sort of paternalistic approach to the structures that have got it in ESOPs. But I think that's also one of the biggest challenges you see with the current models of transition today. It's driven by a paternalistic founder. It's driven by someone who wants to, who does have that sort of, who wants to be a benefactor for their community. But there's not enough people. There may be enough of those people, but not enough of them aware of the models.
I mean, there was the decision to make ESOP unparticipatory, right? To even take the voting rights that generally came with stock from employees was actually a decision in the name of scalability. So they basically argued that if you will create those kind of structures so that owners will not have to give up control of the firm, or the management will maintain in control, because you often have these circular structures with managers deciding on the trustee and then the trustee confirming management, so that you will have more owners going into that. And there is, that's an argument for that. But on the other hand, that might be, true. But on the other hand, all the research shows that ESOPs that are participatory, that share information, that give some control and influence of workers, do much better to ESOPs that are paternalistic, hierarchical, and non-participatory. So over long term, I'm not sure what is a better decision.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. So, mate, I could keep geeking out on this stuff for a long time. But as we sort of go through, you touched on one sort of element I'd love to go as we sort of start sort of coming towards the end of this episode. But like you talked about sort of the cultural change that needs to happen within a business as they're looking to adopt employee ownership. Like, what do you see are the biggest things that need to happen?
It's a very good question. And the one that I might not be most capable in answering because I just started, helping conversions a few years back.
Okay.
But what I can say is that I see the role and the importance of education in the conversion process. So that's what I already learned. I'm not really sure, what kind of child culture change should happen. I think that what we try to learn, working with companies that have engineers as employees, but also working with companies that have minimum wage employees in manufacturing, um, you still need to educate on the very basics of financial and business literacy. So people have to understand what's going on with the firm to be able to understand the important decisions that need to go, the strategic decisions that need to happen, depending on where the firm is financially or in terms of investment and so forth. So financial literacy, then ownership values. So kind of teaching about the long horizon, about the horizon, right? About not having myopic, short term motivated decisions overrunning the long-term decisions. And how you can do that is not only through education, but having, for example, individual capital accounts that account for the growth of the company. And you basically say, if you will make decisions that will be in the long-term interest of the business, you will see your wealth grow, right? Your security grow. So you need to connect it to the personal interest generally for the people to be willing to learn and to be motivated to learn about those things. So that has been very helpful, connecting financial interest with decision making and the control. Yeah.
Nice. They're awesome. Touch on that to touch on those. Now, if we think about a little bit different, what do you find is the biggest barriers for a retiring owner to transition to an employee-owned model?
First of all, even knowing that this option exists. I think we just did an interesting research with University of Ljubljana. We tried to map the succession plans for business owners in Slovenia.
Yeah.
So we did research and we asked business owners, when are you retiring? When are you exiting? And what are your plans? And we gave a lot of options and we asked later on in the survey about, employee buyouts and so forth. So a lot of owners do not realize that this is an option. A lot of owners are retiring, and even more owners, I think almost 75% do not have succession plans. They don't know what to do after exit. So it's really important that information comes to them and that some kind of institutional support makes it easier for them to sell businesses to employees. And we've seen that in one of the questions that we asked, which was, how would tax incentives, financing and technical support help you in converting your businesses to employee ownership? And there was a great majority of business owners saying, if we have all this, we would be very willing to transition to employee ownership. And we're talking about thousands of owners here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that stat blows my mind. 75% of them don't have any succession plans at all. What's going to happen? They're just going to close the doors? It's crazy.
And 50% are retiring or exiting in the next 10 years.
Wow.
Of the closely held businesses are changing ownership. For 3/4 do not have no idea what's going to happen. So I think that should, ring bells, alarm bells, or what's how do you say it, with the decision makers. It's a very important, it's a very important question of what's going to happen with our small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe. And it's not just Kenya, it's everywhere. So
yeah, I totally agree, and I think you articulated perfectly, like what sort of the potential impacts in this sort of more globalized economy. Like it's going to lead to some like really big challenges to local communities, their economies, and the countries and the EU. So yeah, it's definitely one that needs to be acted on.
And that's basically why we managed to convince the Slovenian political parties that they give tax incentives on ESOP buyouts, and then they start to build an additional ecosystem with financial instruments and so forth to support those transactions. So let's hope that they continue to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tej, look, this has been an awesome conversation. We're just all good things need to come to an end, though. So, but before we do, I'd just like to take you through a fast round of questions where I ask you 3 questions and you offer a quick response. How does that sound?
Of course, sure.
All right. Who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
David Ellerman.
That was quick. I suspected it was going to be David Ellerman, and it was quick. Chris Mackin also said yes, David Ellerman, who's also.
I also would say Chris Mackin.
Yeah.
Very
okay.
Close. Yeah.
What is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
I think Clio by the Rutgers University is very good.
Okay.
You're talking about literature?
Yeah. We'll put a link. We'll put a link there in the show notes for that. And then finally, what would you say to a business owner who is sitting on the fence regarding an exit to employee ownership?
Think about your legacy and what you were building and what you want that it remains of what you built as a business owner.
Love that. Awesome. Well, Tej, thanks again for your time. Like, where can people find you? Reach out to you if they want to have a conversation.
Well. Follow our social media pages of the Institute for Economic Democracy. We have a lot of information there in English, in Slovenian, for those of you that understand Slovenian, for those 2 million of you. But yeah, that's the organization that I'm honest to, and yeah,
okay.
You'll find there, and me as well.
Very great. Okay. Yet again, there'll be links to all those people and organizations in the show notes. Tej, thank you so much for your thought leadership and in the space, and also driving these policy changes and how sort of not just Slovenian government, but also like governments globally or in the EU and also globally are thinking about this huge challenge and also this great opportunity to be able to address it. So yeah, can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you, Andy, for having me. Really.
Okay.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.